Okay, welcome everyone to the very last Elevate Lane County Working Wednesday of our fall series. My name is Lizzie Gray and I'm a project coordinator for Connected Lane County. And as many of you know, since we've done this for 8 weeks, each Wednesday we take a deep dive into the New World of Work's top 10 professional skills. And we analyze what those skills are and see how they apply in different fields of work. These are skills that have been recognized by K-12 industry or K-12 education, post-secondary education, and industry as the skills that we need to enter the workforce to be successful. And today, joining me, I have 4 professionals from a variety of industries. Would you like to introduce yourselves? Elena, we'll start with you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Elena Fracchia, and I work for Columbia Bank, is my main job, and I'm a wealth and philanthropic advisor. I also teach a class at the University of Oregon, so I spend a little bit of time over there as well.
Philanthropic. Can you break that word down for us really quickly?
Philanthropic is related to charitable giving, and they're kind of equal.
Got it. Thank you. Bess.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bess Jamie. I'm the Director of Education at United Way, which is a local nonprofit.
Eric.
Hey everyone, my name is Eric Brayman. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the Arts Education Program Manager with Lane Arts Council, who is also a nonprofit here in Eugene. We serve all of Lane County, and I work in education, but we also do programming and supporting artists, doing artist advocacy, as well as public sector kind of work around art as an industry for our community. So been with them for about just over 3 years now, and I actually used to be a student of Elena's, so also an alumni of the University of Oregon, getting my master's in nonprofit management there. Good to be here.
Thank you, Eric. And Celeste.
Hi, I'm Celeste Peterson, and I'm the Director of People Development at Palo Alto Software, which is in Eugene, not Palo Alto. And it's a company that produces software for entrepreneurs and small business owners to help people succeed in business. And Director of People Development means it's a type of human resources position.
I love it. Thank you all for being here. I think I failed to mention this, but the professional skill that we are taking a deep dive on today is self-awareness, which I think is both a professional skill and just a human skill that we should have in general. Before I get us started by asking our panelists some questions, I do want to encourage all of the students who are tuning in to type in any questions that you have for the panelists into the chat box. We cannot see or hear you, but I will be monitoring that closely, and we will absolutely make sure that we get to all of your questions. So please go ahead and type those in as we chat. Alrighty, so for the very first question, and maybe we'll start with the order that we introduced ourselves in. For the group, as you've grown as a professional, how have you assessed your strengths and weaknesses? And is that something that you've done on your own, or is that something that you've learned from past reviews with supervisors?
Okay, so I guess that means I'm going first, yes. I'm not sure specifically how I have assessed my strengths and weaknesses. I think I'm an avid sort of personal development leadership book reader. I love seeing how people frame information, what questions they ask, how they categorize people. So I find that myself, I've taken all of the tests that are out there. I love taking them. I love seeing what they say, what the questions they ask. So a couple of the books tests that I've seen out there, one of them is StrengthsFinder, which I think is a fantastic one that gives you a report back that sort of takes a look at how you might be in the workplace. And I think that one was really interesting for me to be able to speak from a place of strength versus a place of weakness. So that was one that I really enjoy. And then I've also been part of a couple of leadership programs that had their own tailored self-assessments that allowed me to see different versions of how I interact with people, how I work on teams, what types of workplaces are helpful for me, which types are not as helpful. And I think all of those things have sort of meshed together, helped me get to that point of where am I strong and where are the places that I'm going to be a little bit more challenged.
Absolutely. Quick follow-up question for you. Is that a test that, say, a student could take who might not have a ton of work experience in different environments? Are the questions tailored to past work experiences, or could they just apply to like life in general?
The questions are really more life and they're more situational. Like, what would you do in this situation? Here's a, what's your initial response? So I think I would say yes. And I'm seeing other people nod their heads. So maybe I'm not out of line and saying yes. I think anybody could take it because it really does look at your core strengths of who you are, which means you could take it before you start working and start to get that sense. And I would say if you're taking it as a young adult, check back in 5 years and take it again and see what it says after you've been in the workplace, after you've learned from other people and you see how other people work. I think what I've seen is if you take it multiple times, there are things that will stay the same. There will there will also be things that you've learned along the way that may adjust how you answer a question and maybe change what some of your strengths are.
Awesome. There is a question in the Q&A forum. Could you throw a link to that test that you mentioned in the chat, maybe while Bess is answering?
Yes.
Thanks, Elena. Bess.
Yeah, I'll echo what Elena just said and also answer that for me, it's really been both throughout my career, both sort of self-exploration of my strengths and weaknesses and receiving good feedback from my supervisors and mentors. I would say that when you're receiving feedback in person from a supervisor or from someone that you work with, that you need to take it to some degree with a grain of salt. But if it's somebody that you really respect and that you're trying to learn from and that you really sort of aspire to be like, then to really listen hard to what they're saying, because sometimes when they're giving you really good feedback, it can be a little bit surprising. Like it's not something you might have thought about yourself. But if you can let down your defenses a little bit and let that get in, it can really inform your own sense of yourself and your strengths and your areas of opportunity as opposed to weaknesses. I also, and probably I'm just going to out myself as a Gen Xer, but like from the time I was a teenager taking like Cosmo quizzes, that was a big thing in my day before like pre-internet, but like like Facebook quizzes or like all these little personality things. I was always drawn to that because even when they're goofy and kind of silly, it's kind of fun just to get a reflection of yourself based on your answers. And so I encourage you all to just to lean into those types of tools that you come across. There's all different kinds of like personality quizzes or like Elena was saying, StrengthsFinder. I've taken StrengthsFinder probably 4 times now, and just at different points in my life. Always very helpful. I tend to have the same top 3 strengths, but you get a list of your top 5 and those sort of fourth and fifth tend to change depending on where you are. But like Myers-Briggs and other types of the anagrams and, other different tools that are out there, just go for it because things will resonate. Some stuff won't, but it's always a little illuminating to find out like, okay, I'm seeing that as a strength in myself and I can either grow that or maybe I'm realizing that all my strengths are like in this one area and I need to work on growing my muscles in another area of either work or relationship building or whatever it is. So it's helpful to highlight your areas of opportunity as well.
Absolutely. I have a slight addiction to taking BuzzFeed quizzes.
Right. I know they're just fun. And yeah, so, and now they're just much easier than filling in like little squares in magazines.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Bess. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, going to put another one out there for StrengthsFinder. That's one of my favorite tools that I've used personally and have come across around self-awareness and being aware of kind of like, what are the gifts that I bring to the table and how can I use those gifts to accomplish the things and tasks that are in front of me, knowing that everyone has different approaches to solving similar problems. I would also say I'm a huge advocate and proponent and appreciator of the annual review. It's a thing that happens when you get into the professional workspace that once a year in most employment positions and sometimes even twice a year, there is a review of your skills and the work that you've done in the workplace over that past year. And I know that it's, for some people, it can be a really stressful time of year. For other people, it can feel kind of annoying or stressful, I guess, go back to that. For me, it feels like a really great opportunity to engage really open dialogue about what people are seeing that I may not see in myself. And there's always, every time I've had an annual review, there's been pieces that have come in that I've been really surprised by. That's been really exciting. So that piece of, do other people support you in that self-awareness? Yes, absolutely. And I loved what you were saying, Bess, about like really opening yourself up to not be on the defensive. And actually, that's a self-awareness thing I've had to check in myself, is that I do default to defense. And it's been something that my supervisors have had to really support me in being more comfortable and open to receiving the feedback. And I think the annual reviews provides that structure for me of doing the work ahead of time for myself to come in with a really open mind and open heart. And then sometimes I've learned to like assess myself when people get feedback in the moment, which is also rich and super valuable. And often what I realize I have to do is I take a day to really let that sink in and come back to the person and say, hey, I heard what you said yesterday. I think that I might have reacted in a way that I don't actually stand by. But let me go ahead and take that back and just appreciate you for giving me that feedback, because I am working to grow. And that's a space that I really appreciate you giving me some context on. And I will say, I think that there is a lot of self-awareness also in the self-check of appreciating what you're doing well. I think it's really easy when thinking about self-awareness to look at the things you're not getting right. And there's a lot of value in being able to name for yourself, this is what I do well. This is what I do get right. And I think that that's been something else that has been kind of a sustainability practice as well for me in my work. On those days when it's really stressful and it feels like there's too much to get done and I am feeling like a failure, to go back and really reflect on those things of, you know what, I'm really good at working with people. I'm really good at having clear communication. I'm really good at coaching the people I work with. That's a skill that I can go back and feel really positive about, knowing I'm accomplishing those things in a really rich way. And this new skill that I'm developing right now that is not perfect and I'm still learning, that's an area of growth. It's not an area of failure. Again, going back to kind of what Beth said. So I think those are like my layers within there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. Celeste?
Yeah. By the way, my pronouns are she, her. I realize my Zoom profile doesn't show you that. So, one of the things that makes self-awareness such a tough topic is that it's hard to see yourself or see your strengths and weaknesses as well as you can see them in others. And so that's why I think it is so important to hear other people's feedback, because they can tell you how things appear from the outside. You can only see yourself from your own internal perspective. So it makes it tricky to see how, to understand how you're impacting other people. And, but I also really appreciate what Beth said about taking some of that feedback with a grain of salt, because a lot of people are going to volunteer feedback to you. And so I heard someone say recently something that I thought was really powerful. And it was, you know, pay the most attention to feedback from people who you asked for it from, or they're your boss. Because, you know, your manager at work, it's their job to help you be as successful as you can be. So their feedback is obviously important. And then people like, again, what I'll repeat what Beth said, you know, that people you admire, people you would like to, you know, be more like, or, you know, they have expertise that you value. Ask them for feedback and pay close attention to that feedback. And then other people may give you great feedback too, but you know, be a little bit selective, because if you try to be all things to all people, you're never going to be, you know, you can't please everyone. And so, you know, I think an important part of self-awareness is knowing for yourself what you want, what, you know, what kind of person you want to be, or what kind of things you want to accomplish, and stay focused on that, and focus, you know, the feedback you're gathering on that. And don't get, you know, don't beat yourself up if you're not pleasing everyone. but try to be open to that feedback from the people whose feedback you value. And then I think I've learned a lot in my career about my, self-awareness from my quote unquote failures. I think you learn so much more when you fail than when you succeed. When you succeed, it's like, great, done, over. Chalk that up to success. But when something doesn't go well, you can really take a look at that and think about what went wrong or what you can do better. I find those to be the greatest learning experiences of my life, when things just didn't go the way I expected.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that positivity. There's a question in the chat, and Celeste, you actually started to kind of scratch the surface on it, but a student asks, when do you all, what, excuse me, can't read. What do you all do when/if you receive feedback about yourself that seems inaccurate? So there's Bess's grain of salt. Is all feedback useful, or do you have to learn to filter some of it out? And I will just let that question simmer with all of you. And if anybody has an answer, go ahead and unmute yourself and answer it at will.
Well, I'll kick it off just for a second. I think that, especially when I was younger, the negative feedback that I would get would stick with me so much longer than any positive reinforcement someone would tell me. And so I want to be careful just about cautioning you to spinning too hard on that like negative feedback loop, because it's easy to hear a piece of, even if it's mildly constructive or critical feedback, and just go into a shame spiral, right? Where you're like, I don't do anything good, and like, I suck at this, and this is awful. When often, if you can steel yourself a little bit and just try to think about, what the person was trying to get out of you when they told you that particular thing, like they wanted you maybe to work faster, or maybe to do something a little bit different, instead of focusing on some kind of word that triggered a negative feeling in you, try to think about like, what's the motivation behind that piece of feedback. Sometimes that can just distance you enough to not take it so personally, because often when you're receiving feedback from supervisors or coworkers or someone that you've been working with, it's really to get to the end goal of the project that you're working on, or the task that you're working on, and it's less about you as a person. And so I think that all feedback is useful to the extent that if you can look at it with a little bit of distance or a little bit of detachment from your self-esteem. It's one thing to be self-aware, and it's another to feel your own self-worth, and those two things can often be a little bit different. So I just want to caution you against the shame spiral, because believe me, I've been there. And also, if it does seem inaccurate, think about why. And you can always, to Eric's point, go back to that person and either lean in with curiosity and just say, I'm curious, will you tell me more about why you thought that about me? Or that didn't quite land right, and could we maybe unpack this a little bit or talk about it some more? And so you don't have to take everybody's feedback at face value if it doesn't feel like if it fits you. Definitely you can always gracefully push back or just ask for more information.
Yeah.
And take what you can use and set down the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned that asking for examples too might help kind of put everything into context and remove whatever defense you have up or block you have up, so that you can reflect back on those situations to be like, oh, actually, I see that they have a point there. 2 more questions from students. Should you ask for feedback about this as much as you can from people outside of your home? So where are we looking for feedback? Who are we asking? And let's put ourselves in a student's shoes.
I would say yes. I think it's really great to ask for feedback from people that you work with in an academic or even paraprofessional or professional environment, because I think about my parents, and my mother sometimes was one of the first people to tell me ways to improve, which was super helpful and sometimes not super helpful. She loved me deeply, and one of her ways of showing love was to let me know how I could continue to grow the skill that I was working on. Whereas my dad, I think, would just kind of just say good job, and that was kind of the extent of it. And he would tell me also deeper appreciations, but it was often in a positive light. And sometimes it felt like there were extremes that were coming my way from them, because they want to see success, right? And so they're going to default, many parents will default to that. Not everyone has that kind of environment at home either. You know, some families, it may feel like it's a little bit more so heavy on the negative. And I think it's really important to do get perspective outside the household, because I'm a different person at work than I am at home. That is just a truth. And because there's a different layer of trust, there's a different layer of relationship, there's a different layer of transparency as to who I am and how I want to present myself. And so, you know, my husband, for example, is not going to be the best person to give me feedback on my professional role, because he sees me as his partner. And there's going to be a very different relationship and feedback that I get in the office or even in the academic environment, where I am activating different parts of myself. So I would say, you know, at school, it's really great to find a teacher that you really trust and a teacher that you work closely with, either as like a club kind of activity or a coach that you work with in your sports kind of activities, or director or art teacher that you do in a creative environment. Those kind of mentors that exist, and open the conversation, because, you know, teachers are there to support you and help you develop.
Oh no.
Great space to get some feedback from. Oh, did I freeze a little bit?
Just for a second, but you're back.
Sorry. I have unstable connection. Well, anyways, go to those mentors that you have in the academic environment. And then the other thing I would say is that if you do any volunteer service, if you're a member of a church, or if you do any type of activities that are out there in the community, also ask those mentors. You know, I bring on student interns every single year, and one of my favorite parts of that role is being able to reflect with them on what their goals are, how we can set them up to be able to develop those skills, and also reflecting on where they can develop those skills while they're working with us. So also, it doesn't hurt to go out and find those kind of mentors in the community.
Absolutely. And this feels like a beautiful time to plug our Elevate Mentorship Program. We do have a project-based mentorship program as well. Students can apply year-round. That application can be found on our fall flyer or on our website, in the calendar on our website. And we encourage all high school students to apply. You pitch us your project idea, we fund your project, we pay you like an internship, and we pair you with a professional mentor. So just a quick plug. There is a second question here that asks, if you get feedback that you don't like about yourself, so there's the defense. Sometimes it stings, I understand. Should you try to change or no?
Ooh, that's such a good question. Okay, so there's like a couple angles I want to take on this that gets to some of those other questions too. Because I think if you get feedback that you don't like, I think step one is to like stop, breathe, take a day to hear it, listen to it, kind of roll it around. As Bess mentioned, like not take it totally to heart in the shame spiral way, but just hear it and say, you know, what I kind of do is go, oh, that's interesting. That's not what I was trying to accomplish, and what could have done that? Yeah. So there's a couple influences that I think can provide that feedback. Number one, not everybody is good at giving feedback. I want to be extremely clear about that. You will not always have bosses, teachers, mentors that are good at giving feedback. I've had a lot of people in my life who are terrible at giving feedback. And the way that it's come across has been an attack that automatically puts us on the defense. And it uses words that are meant to hurt you because they know how to do that. You know, these are people that work with you closely. They see you in every situation. And supervisors are taught to give positive and negative feedback, right? Let's give them something to work on. And so sometimes they're sort of grasping at something and they're looking to be like, well, I didn't give them any negative feedback. I got to do that. Okay, here's the thing. So I caution the immediate sort of knee-jerk response, because not everybody's good at giving feedback. And so I always try to recognize, like, where's that person coming from, right? So we're talking about self-awareness, we're talking about our own awareness, but also part of self-awareness is being aware of the person across the table from you. And so I think that has to play a role in the information that we're taking in and accepting about ourselves. The second component of this is, if you're getting feedback that really sort of like sets you on fire, like that really immediate rage feeling, it might mean because they got to something in you that has a little tiny bit of truth. Also, hard lesson to learned it the hard way, where it's like, if you have that immediate response, my initial reaction used to be like, oh, there's no way. And now I sort of go, well, why is that making me so upset?
Absolutely.
Because, and usually it's making me upset because it's like the opposite of what I want to be, but maybe I did something, or I said something, or I'm approaching something and it's not working with the people around the table. I'm not being self-aware. And so I think if we're being self-aware, no, you don't have to change. I think if there's an opportunity that that's something you want to work on, then I would say, let's dig into it, figure out how you're going to do that. Ask that person and say, next time we're in this situation, I don't want you to call me out in the middle of the group, but if you see that happen, can we talk about it right away after? So we don't wait a whole year before we talk about it.
Right.
So asking for that specific action that you're looking for that says, when you see that, will you help me? Or can we have a secret sign in the meeting that's like, hey, you're kind of being a jerk here, so that I can suddenly stop and say, oh, I'm not paying attention and I need to. So get those people on your side and say, hey, help me do this better. This is what would help me, and this is how I want to approach it. So you're being proactive. But I'm not a proponent that says you have to change, but I do think if it's something that you're like, wow, I really don't want that, and you believe what they've said could be true. Like I said, not everybody is giving you accurate feedback. If you don't think it's accurate and that person's not coming from a good place, we're probably going to let that one go. If there's somebody you respect and they might be coming from a place that could help you, let's lean into that and figure out what that is. So two sides of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think taking a minute when you do feel that fire spark up inside of yourself to reflect and be introspective is how you become self-aware. So
usually it's because they hit on something that it's all, and I would also say that's true if you like see something in somebody else that you're like, ugh, I hate that they do this, I'm going to give them that feedback. I would just say step back a little bit and say, am I also doing that? Because a lot of times we mirror and we see things that are the sort of faults and failures in ourselves across the table from us.
absolutely. So this next question, I think I'm going to make a little fun. So according to the New World of Work standards, someone who is self-aware seeks out guidelines and rules and typically stays within them. So by a show of hands, how many people on this panel are rule followers? Celeste, explain this.
Gladly. Yeah, that's such a funny question. You're really putting us on the spot. I'm really glad you sent that question to us ahead of time, because I've had to think about that a lot. Because I think everyone has had moments in their life where they broke rules, you know? I certainly have. And sometimes I was doing it consciously, and sometimes I was just not being very self-aware or very thoughtful about what I was doing. And so that's where self-awareness comes in, like being aware of what you're doing or why you're doing it, but also being aware of where you are and what the rules are there. Sometimes you unknowingly break a rule because you didn't know what the rules were. And so especially like, say, coming into a workplace, I think it's important to have a good training and onboarding experience so that you learn what the norms and standards and rules are in that business, because every company is different and has their own culture. My dog's whining, so I'm just going to open the door. Thank you. Okay. But that, so that you can come into that sort of community of people being conscious of how things work there, right? And because I think there can be a lot of faux pas when you come into an environment or group of people, a community, a company, and you're used to a different way of doing things, and so you can have kind of clash with people there, or throw a wrench in the gears of how they've figured out how to make things work. And so I think being conscious of your environment, what the rules are, what the norms are, and then if you break a rule on purpose, just being aware of why you're doing that. I mean, maybe you are in a situation where there something's unfair, or there's a rule that's just been a rule forever, but nobody's taken a moment to think about why. Is that still relevant? And maybe there needs to be a little pushback on that. Like, hey, do you think maybe we could do that differently now? Here's why I think that would benefit us. And try to do it in as respectful a way as possible.
Yeah.
Because people, those rules were invented for a reason at some point. And people may have strong feelings about that too. But I think it's a good idea to think about why the rules are there and what actually works best.
Thank you.
Let those things evolve.
Yeah. Thank you for that semi-rule following perspective. It's helpful. Bess, can you tell us about a time that you were really self-disciplined?
Sure. So about 4-ish years ago, I made the fairly crazy decision to go to grad school and work full time and parent 2 teenagers and 2 dogs.
Oh boy.
And so that was a time of my life that the way that I describe it is like I locked down and moved forward, like blinders on. I didn't have really any social life to speak of because I was working full time and going to school in between and trying to hold down my household. And so that just required a level of self-discipline that I'd never had sort of before, or really frankly since. So just because it required so much time management. And I think for me, when I think about being self-disciplined, it's really when I'm managing my time really precisely, because there's just not a whole lot of wiggle room when you've got to work between 8 and 5 and then do homework between 6 and 10 and get some sleep and see your kids or whatever else you're doing. And that's like 7 days a week, right? So that was just I knew it kind of going into it. I tried to prep my family as best as I could that this is what it was going to be like. I also just tried to really when I was off school during breaks, like really put it down and just be fully present with my people, knowing that they needed me then. So I had to do a lot of practices around intentional behavior, intentional time management, intentional relaxation, intentional connecting. And that was a really hard, it was really, really hard. I won't lie. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. But I do feel like it was worth it. And it taught me how to do that well. I'm really good at time management now because I had to do it for 2 years straight. And I would never want to take on that level of multiple commitments again, but I certainly appreciate the experience that it provided me, and don't regret it to this day.
That's great. I was going to ask you what you learned about yourself, and it sounds like that you're a master of time management. Did you learn anything else about Bess?
Yeah, I mean, I learned that that I am not very good multitasker, honestly. Like I thought I always describe myself like I'm an awesome multitasker, like I can do, no, I'm not. I'm a really good single tasker. And I think that we often try to present ourselves because we can hold 2 or 3 ideas in our head at once, that we can be a good multitasker. But it's what winds up happening is you're doing multiple things badly. You're instead of doing like one thing well. And that just became really clear, so that I had to get good at, I had to have the awareness to be like, okay, I gotta stop with this, multitasker facade. It's not true. And that I really have to just pay attention to whatever that single thing is in front of me. My high school students, my kids at the time were high school students, and were very good at pointing out with the fact that, like, mom, hello, like I'm telling you something and you're clearly 15 miles away. So they were really good at pulling me back into the moment and making me focus. And I was realizing I was doing that at work and I was doing it at school. And so I just had to like block everything out and really try to focus on a single task. And I actually still do that to this day, where in my job, if I've got too many priorities, I will like send out an email message like, I'm unavailable for the next 2 days. I'll get back to you, but I need to focus on this one thing. And just setting up systems like that so that people have the expectation that you're not going to be getting back to them right away, or you're not going to be focused on them for a minute, goes a long way
Yeah.
in helping people understand where you're at. So that sort of preparation is important.
Yeah, and clear communication, absolutely. Thank you. A student asks, is there such a thing as being too self-aware, like in a self-conscious, limiting yourself kind of way? And Eric, I'm seeing big head nods. Do you want to tackle this one?
I love this question. This is a great question, and I think it's something that is universally felt and is often under discussed. And like imposter syndrome, which if you've heard that phrase before, is real at every age, at every location, for every human in this world. There's a time, except for like maybe like the really high up executive white dudes who are like, got the world kind of in their hand. Even them often will sometimes not talk about the imposter syndrome they're feeling in spaces. Everyone feels it. And, this is something, I talked about how I had to kind of develop this understanding and ability to be more open to feedback. And one of the big reasons I know for me that I felt so hesitant about feedback is because I felt so insecure in the work that I was doing and the position that I was holding. That, I've jumped into really high work environments in my professional career, environments that I had to learn very quickly about how the job is done. And then a lot of people's lives were depending on me doing my job effectively so that they could get the opportunities to get work. And there is always this feeling of pressure in work environments. And I think it's very easy to feel so.
No. He'll come back. Or they'll come back, excuse me.
That space of feeling up. I probably froze there, didn't I?
But you're back.
Sorry.
Nope.
It's very easy to jump into that feeling of being not good enough for the work that you're asked to do. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that that is a human experience, that every person goes through that process at moments in their life. And there's going to be other times where you feel like you are thriving and just like you've never felt more successful at work. And it can literally be back-to-back days. Like, I am thriving, I am successful, I'm the best there's ever been. How am I even still in this position? How have I not gotten fired yet? I've had those feelings in the same day. And I think that that is so important to acknowledge. You're not alone in that. And the best way to work through it, is to name it and say it, to let the people know that you're working with that what your fears are. Because I think what you'll quickly find out is that there can be an environment that builds around like acknowledging strengths will start to pop up when people start to also acknowledge fear. And I know that I felt that in a lot of the work environments I've been in. Granted, I am also a very trusting person, and I'm also a very transparent person. So that may not be the best advice for every single person. But at least finding someone in your life that you can speak openly, honestly, and vulnerably about where you're feeling insecure And working through that and finding where does that come from too. I think for me, what I found where it often comes from is that I care very deeply about the people I work with, and I am terrified of letting them down. That is my biggest fear. And I work with a group of usually about 30 to 45 artists in my position, which is already a career that for a lot of them are on the edge of insecurity. And if there's a slip up that I make, the reality is that that can lose them an opportunity that is essential. So I have this intense fear of letting them down.
Yeah.
And that's a real fear. And that's real emotions that I'm experiencing. However, my feeling of not doing my job well is not necessarily dictated by the opportunities I provide them. And that often is a hard distinction to make. And my feelings of being an imposter in my role is feeling like there's probably somebody out there who could do this better. Yeah, maybe, but you're the person in the role right now. And there's a trust that this organization has instilled in you to believe that you are capable of doing it. Also, coworkers, more often than not, my perception is like, oh my God, I'm failing them miserably. And then sometimes I'll say it in a meeting and they're like, what? How are you? No, we actually are like, how are you so competent? And I'm like, oh, I feel really incompetent. And yet people are looking at me like I'm competent. And there's always that dichotomy in life, in all things, but especially the work environment. So yes, it's universal, it's human, and speak it to release it.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Eric.
Absolutely. Can I add one more thing
Of
to that?
course.
Because I totally agree with every word of that. And how I sometimes get through that is reminding myself to be kind to myself. Because it's so easy to say things to yourself that you would never say to anyone else. I think it's so common for people to beat themselves up emotionally and even verbally, your inner speak, you know, you like, have you ever stubbed your toe and said, oh, that was so stupid? Like, you wouldn't say that to someone else who walked by and stubbed their toe, like, that was stupid. No, you wouldn't say that to other people, but you're willing to say it to yourself. And so I try to remind myself to, you know, just take a breath, be kind to myself, and, you know, recognize that everyone has weaknesses, everyone has failures, and we're all doing the best we can.
Absolutely. Great addition. Thank you, Celeste.
Thank you.
One more question from a student I'm seeing. They ask, how can I be more self-aware of how I'm treating someone? So I think that's a pretty interesting question. So just not always this internal monologue and your internal strengths and weaknesses, but instead being self-aware of how you treat those around you. Does anybody want to attempt to answer that one?
I'll sort of jump in on that. How about that? I'll get us started and then somebody can back it up. Because essentially this is asking it's almost a self-reflection on your ability to have and reflect empathy. Because to me, if you're asking a question on how is somebody else perceiving how I'm treating them, then you're halfway there on trying to figure out what they need from you, how they need to be treated, what that looks like. And I think one of the things that we can always be thinking about and working from a place of empathy is asking that question, how might they feel when I say this, when I offer this information? How can I offer it in a way that they might hear it, or that might be that might actually help them do better? Or even asking the question that says, you know, I think one of the things we have to recognize is that a lot of times in the work world, if that's what we're talking about, there's power involved, right? Some people have power either in their position or in their longevity with the company, or maybe it's just in their level of leadership. They're a really good leader, and so they have some innate power. So understanding where do you play into that, and then having that reflect back to them. And I think you can also ask people, and it's not, you know, if everything's going great, it's not then reflecting and saying, well, how is this going for you? How am I treating you okay? But it's instead, when you start to be with people that you're working with, what I look for is body language. Mm-hmm. If everybody in the room is sitting back, their arms are folded, or they're really close, their physical body language is closed off, I want to start asking questions. I want to like stop everything that we're doing and saying, okay, I'm obviously, like, what I'm saying is not sitting well. Help me understand what's going on here. And we don't always get a chance to do that, but I think that's what I would be looking for. So if you're wondering how you're sitting with somebody else, what's their body language telling you? What are the words they're using? What's the tone they're using? If you're getting back nothing but closed off, short answers, they seem frustrated all the time, then yeah, we might want to ask the question of, is it you, or is there something else going on for them? Because again, we don't know people's whole world. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors at home. We don't know what struggles they have. And so I would say not everything is a reflection of what you do, but sometimes it is. And so I think it's parsing out what are those situations, asking people how they're doing, asking people if what you're saying makes sense. Some really, I'm the book person. I'm always the person that's like, here, read this book, read this book, read this book. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. And if you are looking for ways to develop your own leadership, your own communication, her latest book called Dare to Lead is really about how we do that in the workplace. And she's got a lot of tools and conversations around that power dynamic. How do we communicate with people? How do you recognize when something isn't working? And what are the words you can say that when you're in that situation? What are the questions you can ask? You know, I think a lot of times we hear these examples or we ask things and, you know, it's like, I don't have the exact words to tell you, but she does. She's actually a researcher on this, and she will say, like, here's the question you should ask, and here's the exact wording. Figure out how to make it your own. So I would highly recommend that as a resource as you advance in your career and are looking for ways on how to communicate between people, because we all have to do it.
Yep, absolutely. Great start. Yeah.
Yeah,
Beth,
quick
bring it home.
follow up on that, and just that, you know, 90% of our communication with other people is nonverbal. And so if you can get good at reading other people's signals, kind of what Elena was talking about, like closed body language, or their, you know, brows are down, or, you know, just the way that they, you can start to interpret that. But with the caveat that, also to what Elena was saying, it's like you don't always know what other things are influencing that body language. And so getting inquisitive about that, kind of leaning in with curiosity, always just trying to understand, like, am I reading this right? Or I'm sensing that you're getting defensive and that's not my intention. What's going on for you? Sort of just opening doors to other people so that they can explain to you how they're receiving what you're saying. And in written communication, especially at work over email, so much gets misinterpreted.
Yes.
If somebody didn't leave an exclamation point after they said, like, have a great day, like, you could be like, WTF, like, why is that person mad at me, or whatever. You know, there's just so many ways to take written communication out of context or to misinterpret it. So again, just like checking yourself, like, wow, I read that as like super defensive. Like, do you think that's what that person meant? And just giving it space to sort of resolve itself before you start flying off the handle. Like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you, you know, or if you're texting with your boss and they don't give you a smiley emoji, like, don't take that personally. Maybe they were in the car picking up their kids and they were busy, or, you know, like, there's just a lot there that can get hugely misinterpreted. So while it's really great to tune into sort of like nonverbal communication cues, they're easily influenced by other factors. And I'll also just give a +1 to Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. And if you go to college or you're doing any kind of, you know, LCC or whatever, if you take a basic communications 101 class, we'll take you places that you haven't gone. Like, it's a great idea to just kind of learn more about human communication in general, as a starting point to understanding your own self as well. So give a plug for that.
Thanks, Bess. So I'm actually going to jump down a couple questions in my list of prepared questions, and because I want to ask, When you reflect on a situation and recognize that you were in the wrong, so maybe you do get some feedback from a boss or from a coworker, and you accept it and you recognize that you did something wrong. How do you handle that? And or do you tattle on yourself? Do you apologize? How do you handle that? It's not easy to do. And I'll say anybody who wants to answer, go for it.
I'm going to jump in again and then I'll stop talking, I promise. I'm a big believer of tattling on yourself. If you own that shit up front, sorry, if you own it up front and just say, that was my bad, or I completely blew that thing, and give a really heartfelt apology and be like, I am going to do better and I'm hoping you can help me do better. I find that that goes the longest for with bosses and coworkers. And honestly, like, I am a boss too, and my staff will tell me when I've done stuff wrong, or I have to own it to them to say, I really messed that up, you guys. Because nobody is perfect and you're gonna mess up. You just are. Everybody does. It's often, to Celeste's point, the time that you learn the most. And if you can own that up front, it's so much easier than when somebody has to come and correct you or try to, read you the riot act on something you've done wrong. So I'm a big believer in self-tattling, and I do it all the time.
Yeah, a little humility goes a long way. Celeste, I felt like you were reaching for the unmute button.
I had my hand there. I was ready. Thanks for reading my body language. Thank you. Yeah, I think that while Bess was talking, I was thinking about also, I also tattle on myself as much as possible. Just get it out of the way, just start to deal with it. Well, first I do that thing I said earlier, like remind myself to be kind to myself and not beat myself up about it. And then I, just get in there and start fixing it. And the thing about that is it's also important to try to find a place where you feel safe to fail, and a place where the people you work with, embrace that as a learning opportunity for you. And they're not, though I think you'll learn a lot as you have different jobs throughout your career about what kind of environment works well for you. And I'll speak personally. When I ended up at the company I'm at now, one of the things I loved about it was that I just felt so supported, and I could make a mistake and not feel scolded or in trouble. It was just like, oh, I see that didn't go the way, that you wanted it to go. Let's talk through that. Why do you think that happened? Oh, well, that's great, because now we know what to do next time. And I was like, wow, you're so positive and so supportive. And so when you take away that stress of like, oh God, I'm going to get in trouble, you can achieve so much more, because you feel confident and safe. So it may take some trial and error over many years, but I wish for everyone listening that they find that kind of environment for themselves, where, and that means, being willing to set boundaries too, if you are in a place where you don't feel psychologically safe. Set those boundaries, and maybe you talk with your feet and you get out of there and you go to another place. And it's going to take time, but it's really important.
Yeah, I echo that wish for everyone on the call, that everybody finds that work environment, that professional environment where you feel safe. Okay, I have one more question. So I'm going to throw out an all call to our attendees. We have about 5 minutes left. So if you have any last questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat box now. And I think my last question for the group, that I think is particularly important that students hear from you all, is how can you demonstrate self-awareness in an interview, a job interview? And again, I think I'm just going to open it up to everyone. And so whenever you're ready, go for it.
I'll try and kick it off. When I think about self-awareness in an interview, I think about how you present a true, honest perception of yourself. I think, I've been in interviews and I've also been an interviewer, and many, many times throughout my life, I've been very gifted actually to be able to be on a lot of hiring committees to help me really get a sense of what it feels like and what really stands out in candidates. And I think when I feel like I know who the person is that I'm talking to, who like the human is, not necessarily their specific competencies or specific resume, like I know who they are. It's often people who are able to speak really openly and truthfully and honestly about where they feel really confident and where they feel they're excited to develop and where they have made mistakes and how they resolved it. That when you can speak from a space of truth, like real truth, because perfection is a fallacy. It doesn't exist. There's no human, there's no thing, there's no moment in life that is perfect. So there's no such thing as a perfect candidate either. And you don't have to be the perfect candidate. What you want to be is a candidate that connects most deeply with the personality and the excitement of the organization or business that you're applying to. So I think someone who speaks from a space of truth and honesty and who is a little vulnerable in an interview. I think that I used to approach interviews thinking that I had to have the right answer. And what I think I've learned is responding to the moment, responding to what comes up in me, and also being prepared to talk about the moments in my life where I did fail and talk about the moments in my life where I did succeed or where I felt less than or I felt appreciated. That I'm able to reflect on myself and say, okay, I know that that's a place where I did fail. So when that question comes up of, have you ever made a mistake and how did you handle it? That I have an answer that's not just about the mistake, but is also about how I grew as a result of that mistake. And that I'm not just making up a word to sound cool or making up a thing to make it sound real, but like, if I'm speaking from a space of honesty of how I truly grew, they're going to hear that reaffirmed when I talk about my strengths, because my strengths are probably going to be parallel to how I grew and learned in that moment of failure. And so, being comfortable with being truthful and vulnerable, I think would be the best I could say.
Thank you, Eric. Elena?
Something that I would add to that in that interview situation, because it's high stakes, high pressure, and showing self-awareness is hard to do in those types of circumstances. The thing that I always try to remember is part of the interview is actually two ways. It doesn't feel that way most of the time, but it's actually two ways. So me showing this is who I am, this is how I work, this is what I've learned in my career and along the way. This is why I'm at your table. I've come here because these are the things I've learned about myself. This is what I'm looking for. This is the type of environment I'm looking for, the type of workplace, the type of coworkers, the type of culture, etc. You're able to show them that you've thought about what you can bring to the table. And to me, the bottom line is if that works for them and you are the right fit, then that's going to show. If that doesn't mesh, then it's probably not the right position. And I think that's one of the things that is a hard lesson to learn, but one that I can confidently say, if you don't get the job and you've shown who you are, then it probably wasn't the right fit, or it's not the right time, or it's not exactly the right position. And I think there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot in thinking about how can you show your self-awareness, but I think a lot of that is coming to it with a reflective tone and reflections that you can offer on yourself of what you've learned along the way.
Thank you so much for bringing up that point. We try really hard in a lot of conversations around interviewing to highlight that it is a two-way process for sure.
Yeah, you have to decide if you want to work there. I was in an interview process where I didn't like how they made me feel. And I was like, I'm not going to wait for them to call and tell me I'm not the right person. Like, that didn't work. I'm not working for them. I'm removing myself from the process. So I didn't even give them a chance to not hire me because I was like, it's not going to work for me.
Thanks, Elena. Pastor Celeste, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that it's important to be willing to take time in an interview to be thoughtful. And even if that means just being silent for a moment. I think so many people in interviews are so nervous and or excited or so many different feelings, and they feel so uncomfortable with silence. And, you know, if someone asks you a question you weren't expecting, or you have to really think about how you want to answer it, take that moment and maybe even say, excuse me for a moment, let me think about that. And then just hold the silence. And actually, that's a good opportunity for you to see how your interviewers handle that too, because if they're uncomfortable with silence or they try to rush you and you know, don't allow you that opportunity to be thoughtful, maybe that can tell you something about what kind of place this might be to work for. So it's important to take that moment and just, you know, take a deep breath, think through, when is a time that I failed and how did I handle it? Hopefully, maybe you've thought through some of those questions before the interview, but some interviewers will really throw you a curveball. And so you need to, you know, just take a moment. And I think that's okay.
Yep, I completely agree. And Bess, anything to add?
That was all great advice. I think really I don't have anything too much to add other than just to underscore what Eric said about be truthful. Sort of do a little bit of a personal inventory to remember the things that have tripped you up in life, but that you've recovered from, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the resilience, for the recovery, for how you've grown. And it's not the mistake, it's how you dealt with it afterwards. And so coming prepared to really talk honestly about that and with vulnerability, those are the people that I get excited about hiring, because I realize that in the workplace they will be able to make a mistake and not let it completely throw them off. And that's what we want in good employees, because everybody's going to mess up along the way.
Yep, absolutely. All righty, I don't see any final student questions. I think they got them all out at the beginning. So I just want to say thank you so much to all four of you. What a wonderful panel to end our fall webinar series on. So thank you for your time and insight.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Those are great
Thank you.
questions.
Awesome.
Been fun. Thank you.
All righty, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.